letter Y. But what I really want to talk about in this neighborhood is all the incredible technology, especially what's going on inside of 150 North Riverside. That's this building on the right. If you look to the bottom, it's got a Y-shaped, cantilevered base. And the base of this building is only about 39 feet across, and it only takes up 20% of the plot of land it's built in. It's a tall building, looks a little precarious, right? And you might not be surprised to learn that most of the skyscrapers here in Chicago will actually sway in the wind on a really windy day. And the sway is called drift. And there are three big ways that architects counteract drift with their designs. We're going to learn about all three, but let's focus on the first one. If you were to go to the very top floor of 150 North Riverside, you would find gigantic tanks of water. About 160,000 gallons of water inside these tanks. And they're calibrated in a way that when the building sways in the wind, the water in the tanks sloshes in the opposite direction and kind of swallows or dampens the inertia caused by that swaying building. That's why these tanks of water are called inertial slash dampers. Basically, the building goes that way, the water goes that way, the opposing forces bring them both back down towards the middle. We'll learn about the other two ways architects counteract drift later on when we have examples. But let's meet our next celebrity, the Bank of America building, the tallest office building built in Chicago since the year 1990. And it also has some really interesting stuff going on in its base. There is an ordinance in the city that any new building built along the river has to have at least a 30-foot setback at its base. And this setback allows for there to be public access to the waterfront. And you can see how the Bank of America building does it. The first 3 floors are set back 30 feet. The rest of the floors take advantage of the space. They hang over. They're supported by these metal-covered steel beam tripod legs that are illuminated pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Leaving plenty of space for people to walk by up at the top, but also for the cafe by the river all the way down at the very bottom. We'll see a lot of the buildings today illuminate in all sorts of colors, but most of those colors will be pink because it's October. It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. But I mentioned at the beginning of the tour how we're going to explore this idea of the evolution of architecture. And this is the perfect place on the river to do it. So we're actually going to step off of our red carpet and we're going to step onto a time machine. The next 5 buildings we're looking at were all built along the river in chronological order. And we're going to start on the right-hand side with the beautiful Art Deco 2 Riverside Plaza. Art Deco, it's got these deep inset windows, long vertical lines. The lines here often remind me of a pinstripe suit, like something they might wear during the Great Gatsby. And that's the time period we're talking about, right? Late 1920s, remember decadence, excess, wealth, optimism about the future, but what happened at the end of the 1920s? The stock market plummeted, sent America hurtling into the Great Depression, and almost as soon as that was over, World War II began. And for nearly 30 years, almost no new office buildings were built in the United States, including here in Chicago. People didn't need them, they didn't have the resources to build them. Then post-World War II, when people went back to work, they got a new, conservative, austere movement of architecture called Black Box Modernism. This first building on the right-hand side, this is Gateway Center 1, and its identical twin, Gateway Center 2, is directly down the street. Now we use the words conservative and austere to describe Black Box Modernism because of the way that they look. There's no ornate detail. It's all simple lines, sharp, right angles, and really kind of harsh, dark colors. Now this movement was founded by a German architect named Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who really believed in this idea that less is more. He believed in the practicality and the functionality of the building over anything else. And there's this idea in black box modernism that offices are machines to work in. It doesn't sound very cozy, if you ask me. But if you think about this generation, these are people who had lived through the Great Depression, the Second World War. They didn't have time to sit around and argue about how many gargoyles they were going to put on a building. They were too busy rebuilding the country itself. Then, at the beginning of the 70s, architects take one look at black box modernism and they go, well, we're bored. And they want to loosen up, get more creative. And that's what leads them into international style. This white box building, Gateway Center 3, is a great example of international style. It's a softening of, a transition away from black box modernism. So it still has a lot of similar features. Simple lines, sharp right angles. This one's white instead of black, and it's really meant to be kind of timeless and sort of generic. You could find this style of building anywhere in the world where buildings were being built after 1970. Then, in the 80s, that's when we get contextualism, site-specific designs that flatter the overall context. Gateway Center 4 has this curve along the front that once again matches the curve of the river just below it, and the color and the texture of the glass is meant to mimic the color and the texture of the water in the river. So you wouldn't find this building built anywhere else on Earth, let alone here in Chicago, because the architect is using what's going on in the natural environment to inform their design. But our time machine really begins all the way back at the Wrigley Building with European revivalist styles. Then American architects get their own style with Art Deco in the 1920s. Then they go conservative, austere, post-World War II black box modernism. They get bored, they loosen up with international style, and they finish in the 80s with contextualism. We're going to hop back just to the present moment, though. To all my friends who are not from Chicago, you might not have any idea where on earth you currently are. But don't worry, I got up super early this morning, and I put a giant "You Are Here" map on the side of this building just for you guys. That red brick halfway up shows you exactly where we are on the river right now, and you can even see the Y shape of Wolf Point directly above it. Alright, we're going to get back onto our red Harvey cruise because our next celebrity, just here at the corner on the right-hand side, has already made its feature film debut. Some of you might know this building as Gotham City Bank from the opening sequences of the Christopher Nolan Batman film, The Dark Knight, starring Heath Ledger. Although the real name of this building is the Old Main Post Office. In the 20s and 30s, Chicago was the mail order catalog capital of the world. They needed a massive post office to handle all of the incoming and outgoing mail. And what better architectural style than Art Deco, with its deep inset windows and long vertical lines. Recently, there was an almost $1 billion renovation project to turn this building into offices for companies like Uber, Walgreens, Pepsi. You can read the sign. It's so big the highway runs directly through the middle of this building, and there's even a 3-acre large garden all the way up on the roof. It's not open to the public, it's for employees only, but there are 3 acres of tall prairie grass, plenty of places to kind of kick back and relax. Even a few basketball courts on the roof of that building, so it's a nice little glimpse into how the other half works. And I do want to admit something to you all. I'm a little nervous to admit this, but while we're on the topic of the post office, I already know some of you aren't going to like hearing it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't actually like talking about Batman on the tour. I know that there's a handful of buildings in Chicago that were all featured in the Christopher Nolan Batman films, but listen, if I wanted someone to stand up here and lecture you all about Batman for an hour, I would have asked any one of my ex-boyfriends to come and lead this tour. But they weren't available. Thank God. And you know, some people do want to know about Batman. I respect it, and that's why I like to point out the Old Main Post Office. Okay, friends, we're headed further down the south branch of the river, and we're actually going to switch gears. We've heard some facts, now we're going to tell some stories. Because I know what you all are wondering. I'm desperate to know, Stephanie, how did Chicago become the sort of walk of fame of architecture that we know it is today? I mean, this is really the place to see and be seen if you're an architect. And there are 3 moments in history that led to that reputation. And the first one is the Great Chicago Fire. And I'll set the scene for you. It's 9 p.m. at night on October 8th, 1871, and a fire breaks out in the barn of Mrs. Catherine O'Leary. She was an Irish Catholic immigrant who lived in this area, and she didn't actually live too far from where we are right now, only about 2 blocks off in that direction, off the right-hand side of the boat. Now we know for a fact that the fire started in her barn, and there is one kind of big prevailing theory about how, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But you might be wondering, well, Stephanie, shouldn't the river serve as a natural barrier for that fire? But that night there were 30-mile-per-hour winds whipping around the city. It picked up that fire, carried it across the river, and almost like a fire tornado, where it caught on to all the wood buildings that were here before and ended up burning for 3 days. And when that fire was finally contained, 17,500 buildings had been destroyed. 300 people had died, and 100,000 people had been displaced from their homes. This is a great tragedy. The city was angry, and they really wanted someone to blame. And they decided to blame, of all people, or rather, of all creatures, Mrs. Catherine O'Leary's cow. Yeah, they blamed her cow. They really wanted people to think that this cow had purposely kicked over that lantern because it wanted to burn down the city of Chicago. It's a little ridiculous, if you ask me. But also, you know what, I grew up around cows, and I have known some pretty vindictive cows. I mean, they can be really mean. They've got big teeth, ugly feet. This is the worst thing to ever happen, but in a way, though, it was also kind of the best. Because what's more attractive to a group of up-and-coming architects than an entire city that has to be completely rebuilt from the ground up? And it's at this moment that architects from all over the country end up coming here to Chicago. They want to test out their new ideas, their new technology. And this is actually when the skyscraper is invented. Previously, buildings were being made out of wood, brick, stone, really heavy material without a lot of infrastructure. So they couldn't actually be all that tall. But with the introduction of the steel frame, which was significantly lighter, buildings can now stop being built out and start being built up. So let's fast forward about 22 years in the future. The year is now 1893, and this is the year that Chicago is chosen to host the World's Fair. City officials really want to use this opportunity to show the rest of the world how great they're doing, rebuilding their second city after this tragic fire. So they hire architect Daniel Burnham to design the campus for the World's Fair. Daniel Burnham loves European-style architecture, and he gets a committee of a bunch of other architects together, and they create this almost Venetian-style city near the south side of Chicago to be the campus for the World's Fair. And it's really